All right. Hey, everybody. Um, Here, oopsies. We are going to be talking about vitamin C. Vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid, is a really important compound for a number of different reasons, and we're going to investigate some of those. We're going to talk about different sources of vitamin C, and then kind of maybe some of the important people who are related to, not relation family wise, but um, who are significant in kind of the the discovery of vitamin C and the role of vitamin C is kind of a pretty important molecule for, our understanding and for our nutrition. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's go ahead and Alt tab over to the Zoom meeting so I can share my screen. Okay, so here we go. Vitamin C. This is a biological essential or a biologically essential molecule. Now, vitamin C has a number of different functions. For example, it can act as an antioxidant. Maybe that's the way that you've heard of vitamin C and you've kind of talked about vitamin C previously. It's also involved in collagen synthesis. Now, collagen is what's known as a connective, or sorry, kind of a structural protein. Um, and collagen is something that is really important to like maintain, kind of like the structural integrity of different parts of your body. Like your earlobes, I think, are lots of collagen. I think your nose is lots of collagen. And so vitamin C is pretty critical to that. Vitamin C is also involved in iron absorption. We talked about this just a little bit, and we're gonna, kind of talk about it from a slightly different angle now with this. Vitamin C is also involved in supporting your immune system and in neurotransmitter synthesis. So neurotransmitters like serotonin and let's see, serotonin is the one that I can think of right now. Dopamine is another neurotransmitter. Now, for starters, the the person, I guess you could say, who's credited with kind of the not necessarily the, you know, production or invention, because obviously, you know, this wasn't invented by a person because it's a naturally occurring vitamin. But one of the people who's pretty important in the history of vitamin C is this guy, Dr. Albert Zent Georgi, I think is how that's pronounced. He's now deceased. If I remember correctly, he was Hungarian, and he's basically responsible for isolating. That's the key word that you want to think about, the isolation of vitamin C. So, if you think about maybe some diseases that you've heard of or afflictions, I guess you could say, that are related to vitamin C, one of them is scurvy. Now, scurvy is something that you typically, if you're familiar with it, maybe it was mentioned in a history class or something like that. This was really something that impacted sailors, Sailors, specifically sailors who were basically going from, you know, Europe to, well, maybe as far as the United States or maybe South America, making these extremely long distance travels, and they would develop this sickness and these sicknesses. And so one of the things that so let me look back at here. For the end of the 15th century, scurvy was cited as the major cause of disability and mortality among sailors on long sea voyages. So it either killed them or severely impaired them. Now, although Danish mariners were long acquainted with the condition and included lemons and oranges in their marine stores, it wasn't until 1753 that scurvy was recognized in the British medical community at large as directly related to a dietary deficiency. So that right there that was a pretty cool discovery that hey, there's this affliction or this sickness, this thing that people are struggling with, it's directly linked to one particular nutrient. Now, at the time, this 1753, it wasn't necessarily like, aha, we know that it's vitamin C. Instead, it was basically through, arguably hundreds of years of travel log information, I think that people would reflect and be like, oh man, there's this common thing among sailors. They all get sick and they're all doing these long voyages. They're eating this, they're eating this, they're eating this, but they're getting sick. And then there's this other population. Well, they're eating this, this, and this, and they're not getting sick. And you kind of have to do almost not reverse engineering, but you almost have to reconstruct what people were eating and say, okay, well, you know, where are the populations or which were the people who were not getting sick and what was the thing that they were maybe consuming that the other people were not. Now, this next paragraph, in 1763, a fellow by the name of William Stark began a series of experiments on diet and nutrition using himself. So he really put himself out there. He said, well, I'm only going to eat bread and water for 31 days. Now, you know this from kind of everyday life. Bread doesn't have any vitamin C. Vitamin C is most common in your citrus fruits. So he was going with this like super minimal diet. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of protein. There's going to be some minerals like magnesium and maybe some sugars, definitely. Um, but that was it. No calcium or little to no calcium. And what he did after consuming only that for 31 days, Stark added other foods to his diet one by one, including olive oil, figs, goose meat, and milk. In 2 months, no note, where's your citrus fruits? They're not there. So Stark recorded that his gums in 2 months were red and swollen, and they were bleeding easily whenever they were touched. And I have to imagine that it probably, in general, kind of felt uncomfortable. 7 months later, he died, possibly from scurvy and likely from the cumulative effects of this malnutrition. Stark's diet was heavy on meat and starch, but devoid of fresh vegetables and citrus fruits. So whenever I said he really put himself out there, he absolutely did. And he, unfortunately kind of um, succumbed to his own experimentation. Now, this, among other people along the way, it was kind of implicated that, hey, these, citrus fruits, maybe they contain the nutrient. And it was in the 1930s that Dr. Albert Szent-Györgyi discovered and isolated the chemical known as ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. I want you to know those two terms interchangeably. You could have a test question. Which of these is vitamin C? This enables the body to efficiently use carbohydrates, fats, and protein. His discovery was among the foundations of modern medicine. Now, one of the things that he kind of maintained is this kind of position that he had was that we as human beings really don't know a lot about nutrition. What are the roles of different nutrients? What do they do? How do they help? What are essential ones and what are non-essential ones? That's kind of his position that he maintained kind of professionally. Now, with that said, we talked about vitamin C. That's what we're interested in. And there's tons of different sources of vitamin C. And typically, whenever it comes to the amounts of vitamin C that you're getting from different sources, well, we're talking about something within the milligram range. So 33 milligrams of vitamin C are in 3/4 of a cup of tomato juice. 39 milligrams in half of a medium grapefruit. I'm sorry. Um, Broccoli, you can kind of get a pretty broad range there. Brussels sprouts, you get a good amount. Strawberries. I think the most common source of vitamin C for most people is in oranges. Now, with that, you could also take one of those emergency packets or maybe a vitamin C supplement. And if you do that, well, then those are typically about 1,000 milligrams, and you're going to get more than enough vitamin C from that. Now, a good question is, what is vitamin C doing? Well, one thing that vitamin C does is that it helps regulate the production of what are known as reactive oxygen species. Now, reactive oxygen species are molecules that they can, or they tend to kind of present problems to your body. And just to kind of illustrate that, I want to bring this up right here. So these ROS are what are known as reactive oxygen species. Now, these reactive oxygen species, what they can do is they can potentially, well, they can damage membranes and they can damage DNA. They can cause mutations. And one of the maybe more common kind of sources or one of the associations that I always think about whenever it comes to reactive oxygen species is aging. So reactive oxygen species accumulating in your body, well, that's going to cause DNA damage, and that's something that accumulates over time. Now, how does vitamin C play into all of this? Well, vitamin C is something that's going to help produce compounds known as free radicals. So free radicals, basically what they do is they kind of disarm, and for lack of a better word, they disarm or they basically, I guess you could say they kind of cancel out reactive oxygen species. And so one thing that vitamin C does is it leads to the production of free radicals. So I'm going to put this as Vit C leads to FR or your free radicals. And free radicals, I'm going to put that line right there indicating that it blocks ROS. So this is arguably a good thing. Now, in terms of what vitamin C looks like, this right here is ascorbic acid. Now, ascorbic acid is, and this is something that you learn about in 1310, you learn about acids and bases. Ascorbic acid is an acid, and it has two groups that are it has basically two protons that it loses. Now, I don't want you to stress about that, but these numbers right here, these what are known as pKa's, they basically give an understanding of the kind of relative strength of an acid. So you can think about it as it's not it's not a, so ascorbic acid is an acid, and to add onto that, not a strong acid. Now, with respect to ascorbic acid as being a weak acid or not a strong acid, that's one of its important roles. Um, and being an acid, it acts as, or one of the important things that vitamin C does is it acts as an electron donor. Vitamin C is what is known as a water-soluble vitamin, and functionally, it is a water-soluble antioxidant. Antioxidant effects of vitamin C have been demonstrated in many experiments in vitro. So that means like in a lab setting, not in, not in a living system. Human diseases such as atherosclerosis and cancer might occur in part from oxidant damage of tissues or to tissues. Oxidation of lipids, proteins, and DNA results in specific oxidation products that can be measured in the laboratory. Okay, while these biomarkers of oxidation have been measured in humans, such assays have not yet been validated or standardized, and the relationship of oxidant markers to human disease is not exactly clear. So let me put this in a different way or rephrase this. When you have lipids, proteins, and DNA getting oxidized, So I'm gonna say X gets oxidized. Well, there's certain circumstantial data that suggests that that oxidation leads to cancer. Now, with that in mind, there's an idea or kind of a, I guess, kind of a proposal, not really a proposal, but it's been theorized. If you can block this, then can you prevent those disease states, that atherosclerosis or cancer, from developing? Now, that's one of the good questions and important questions about vitamin C. If you can stop this damage from taking place, can you stop cancer? And if vitamin D can stop that damage from taking place, can vitamin C. If vitamin C can stop that damage, then can vitamin C stop the cancer or atherosclerosis? Sorry, I always struggle with that word. Now, that's one role that vitamin C has. Now, there was a fellow, a very important and profound scientist named Linus Pauling. And Linus Pauling, couple, I guess it was, I think he died in the 1980s or 90s. I think it was the, I think it was the 80s. Linus Pauling was a very accomplished scientist, and later on in his career, he became just absolutely fascinated by vitamin C. And he was fascinated by vitamin C to the point where he was like, what does it do? We've seen this data, we've seen this data, we've done all these experiments here, here, and here. And vitamin C seems to do a lot. And so he ultimately came up with this kind of theory of sorts and came up with an idea of how to apply something known as mega dosing of vitamin C. And basically, with mega dosing, and maybe you've possibly heard of like micro dosing, that's where you take a very, very, very small amount of, you know, whether it's a medication or, you're taking a small dose of something. Um, Linus Pauling with vitamin C was like, no, I'm all about mega dosing. Oh, you want to take 250 milligrams? Great. But let's actually take 5,000 milligrams. So let's multiply that by 20 and see what happens. So his theory was that this mega dosing, taking tons of vitamin C, would be hugely beneficial. Now, there remains to be kind of conclusions to, or strong conclusions to support that, but there is definitely some work behind that supports it. Now, another role of vitamin C is, in order to process and talk about this, we've got to talk about globular and fibrous proteins. Now, a globular protein, think about that word glob. Well, a glob would be like, oh, in a couple of days, I'm going to get a glob of mashed potatoes on my plate. I'm going to put some gravy on it. A glob, it's like an amorphous or a shape that doesn't really have strong definition. Now, globular proteins are proteins that are folded to more or less a spherical shape. And that's not like, oh, it's a perfect sphere like a basketball or let's see, a baseball. Instead, it's something that's like, yeah, it's roughly this, but maybe it's got some wild stuff going in some direction. So you know, maybe from 500 feet looks like this, but then when you get closer, it actually kind of looks like this. And yeah, there's a general circular or spherical shape, but a little bit, yeah, not perfect. Okay. So globular protein is more or less your spherical type of shape. Now, a fibrous protein. A fibrous protein is like that, like just that word. It's a fiber. So I always think about a fibrous protein as kind of like a shoestring. or like a string from a, you know, from a sweater that gets caught and just kind of pulls off. So a fibrous protein is something that's organized approximately parallel along a single axis. So if you think about it, an X and Y axis, well, if we have a single axis, that would be an X axis. And a fibrous protein I'm gonna switch colors to illustrate a fibrous protein. Let's go with green. It's going to be basically parallel to a single axis. So here's my fibrous protein. It looks like a thread, it looks like a string. And that's exactly what we see down here. And the fibrous protein that we're shown down there, look closely, is collagen. So there's a number of different fibrous proteins. Muscle proteins are like actin and myosin. Those are fibrous proteins. Collagen is another fibrous protein. Some people, and that's collagen's the protein that makes up your fingernails and your hair. Um, and that's something that, if you've ever met someone who, maybe they take a collagen supplement or something like that, their fingernails are going to be, they're going to be kind of brutal, meaning they're very strong because it does get processed and fortified. Okay, so a fibrous protein can contain a polypeptide chain organized approximately parallel along a single axis. Fibrous proteins consist of long fibers or large sheets. They tend to be mechanically very strong, and they are insoluble in water and dilute salt solutions. They play important structural roles in nature, and they tend to have only one type of secondary structure. We talked about secondary structure with your alpha helix and your beta sheet and everything like that. Some examples are collagen of connective tissue of animals, including cartilage, bones, teeth, skin, and blood vessels. Now, a fibrous protein shown right here to the right. Collagen is our fibrous protein that we're going to look at. Now, the principal component, this is the principal component of connective tissue, of your tendons, cartilage, bones, teeth. There are three left-handed helical chains that are interwoven to produce a right-handed superhelical twist. So basically what that means, this right here, is basically like it's three strings and they're kind of braided together. Braided, I think, is a good way to simplify that. Now, collagen, just like all other proteins, is made up of amino acids, but this has a particular composition that's neat. One residue out of three is a glycine. Now, there are also a number of other unusual amino acids. Now, if you remember your single letter amino acid codes and the structures of those and the classification of those, there's one amino acid known as proline. And proline is a pretty kind of crazy protein because it's got a very rigid structure. In collagen, proline is found in there, but there's a modification to it. You have three different variations of that. They are 4-hydroxyproline, 3-hydroxyproline, and 5-hydroxylysine. So what that means is that for 4-hydroxyproline and 3-hydroxyproline, it's a proline molecule with a hydroxide group. So proline, if you remember, looks a little bit like this. Okay, so it looks like that. This would be carbon 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this hydroxyproline, 4-hydroxyproline, would look like this. I'm going to erase that 4. It's going to have an H, and then it's going to have an OH. Now, what I want you to take away from this is collagen. What is the structure of collagen? Collagen is made up of glycine and proline and hydroxyproline. Those two amino acids, proline and hydroxyproline, are nearly a third of the amino acids in collagen. Now, the significance of this and how this relates to vitamin C is shown here. So at the top of the screen here, we have our proline amino acid, just like I showed you, whereas that kind of ring structure. Now, what vitamin C is going to do is it's going to add a hydroxide group, and that hydroxide group is indicated right here. Now, this would be an example of one, two, three. I'm numbering my carbons there. So that would be 3-hydroxyproline. So if it's not there, that OH group could be on that carbon right there, or make 4-hydroxyproline. Now, the significance of this, and this is where we're bringing back something from previously. Okay, so if we make collagen, and we make these, let's say we got one strand, another strand, another strand, those 3 strands. What we need them to do is kind of get braided around one another. And it's not exactly a braid like braid your hair, but they kind of get wrapped around one another. And they make this pretty cool structure. The only reason that they stay close together is because of these hydroxide groups. So what that means is that the, I'm going to say hydroxylated proline keeps or brings, I guess, brings, keeps, whatever, collagen together. Okay. Now, let's say that we were able to synthesize each one of these. Those are 3 strands, or 3 collagen chains. We've got a bunch of glycines in there. We got a bunch of prolines in there. And if we have vitamin C, well, then we're going to get our hydroxyprolines. So we're going to be good. Now, in the event that we do not have this, what's going to happen? Well, we don't have that ascorbate. That's what I was kind of emphasizing here. Let me go ahead and erase that. If we don't have that ascorbate, then this reaction is not going to take place. And if that reaction doesn't take place, this doesn't get put together, or that hydroxyproline is not made within collagen. And if that's not made, well, then our 3 chains of collagen don't get wrapped up around one another. Now, where that's really important is think about what collagen, a connective tissue. Okay, let's think about what collagen's involved in. Collagen of connective tissue of animals is found in cartilage. Okay, so my ears, my nose, bones under my skin, in my body, teeth, skin, and blood vessels. Okay, so collagen helps those things all form structures and remain intact. So if I don't have collagen and I'm making blood vessels, then they're probably going to be pretty weak if they form at all. Same thing goes for your skin, your teeth, your bones, your cartilage. Essentially, what all this boils down to is that's our link of, well, vitamin C to a disease state where our teeth are weak, our skin is really kind of in bad shape, something known as, well, scurvy. So this was, as we mentioned previously, this was first mentioned with sailors who weren't getting any vitamin C. So they don't get that vitamin C, they don't get collagen formed, then any wound that they get doesn't heal as easily. Any new skin cells that are formed aren't as strong as the ones that they're replacing. Any of your gums are getting weakened and getting more sensitive. They're bleeding all the time. That's essentially what we're looking at here with, Well, collagen. Now, with that in mind, that's one of the things that collagen is going to do, and that's all because of vitamin C. Now, another thing that vitamin C is going to do, well, that's going to have an impact on this guy right here at the center of this. If you remember, this is heme, and then at the center of this is iron 2 plus. That's pretty essential for moving oxygen around your body. Well, the oxygenation of heme and the color of blood. Okay, so I bring this up that iron in the center there, this has to be Fe2 plus. Now you might think, well, it has to be. What if it's not? And well, what does that mean if it's not Fe2 plus? What is it? Well, if it's not Fe2 plus, then it's something like Fe plus or Fe3 plus. And these two things don't do a good job of replacing Fe2 plus in the center of this ring. So if you put Fe3 plus here, that'd be bad. And the way that that would be bad is, well, that iron ion, that 3 plus iron ion, isn't going to bind oxygen very well. And what that means is that this heme that transports oxygen throughout your body is going to do a pretty bad job of doing that. So you're not going to get oxygen from your lungs to your fingers. You're not going to get oxygen from your lungs to your toes, in which case those parts of your body will, as they're not getting oxygen, they're not really being kind of revived every few seconds. They're not going to be in good shape. Now, the oxidation, so this right here, the oxidation of Fe2 plus to Fe3 plus prevents O2 binding. And in the event that that happens, you might see a condition like this. This is known as methemyoglobin. So when Fe3 plus heme, or when that Fe3 plus is present, that specific compound has kind of a brownish color, and it's known as methemyoglobin. Okay, so that's what that individual compound looks like. Well, how does that relate to, the star that I just drew? This isn't like a camera trick. These people's, or this person's fingers, they kind of have a blue hue to them. And that blue hue is because of this particular type of hemoglobin or heme. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It's because of Fe3 plus. Because that Fe3 plus can't bind oxygen, O2 doesn't get right here. And what that means is you're having a less oxygenated part of your body, and these fingers are less oxygenated. The blood that goes to the tips of your fingers is less oxygenated. And so that will begin to appear blue. Okay, now, in addition to, or sorry, with respect to that, vitamin C helps the reduction of Fe3 plus to Fe2 plus. So what that means is, and what that looks like is right here. What I want to draw your attention to is this. This is our ascorbate. And here we have basically Fe3 plus and Fe2 plus. Now what ascorbate can do is it can take a single electron and give that electron to Fe3 plus. And whenever it does, it makes Fe2 plus. Now there's a little bit more to that process, specifically this part right here, but I don't want you to stress about that. Instead, I want you to think about, well, what ascorbate does is it gives an electron, or let me rephrase that. Vit C gives an electron to Fe3 plus, making Fe2 plus. Now, this is very important because we don't want Fe3 plus kind of taking the place of Fe2 plus in heme and in hemoglobin, because when that happens, then we're not really going to be able to get the form of iron that we need to move oxygen around our body. Now, for immune support, or the role of vitamin C in immune support, it is maintained in very high concentrations in most of your immune cells. And one of the things that it does is it helps in wound healing. So this item right here. In addition to that, it can help reduce inflammation. So there's a handful of papers, and this one in particular says that newly discovered enzymes in this family regulate cell metabolism and epigenetics, and dysregulation of their activity can affect phenotype growth and survival pathways. Now, what I want you to know about the role of vitamin C is that vitamin C um, is pretty important for collagen synthesis and therefore wound healing, and it can help reduce inflammation. Now, as a neurotransmitter or related to neurotransmitters, I found this paper that talked about vitamin C's function in the brain. And there's proteins that are involved in the transport of vitamin C. And one of them is known as a vitamin C transporter, or this sodium dependent vitamin C transporter 2, or SVCT2. Now, what I wanted to draw your attention to is this statement at the bottom, or this last few sentences. Neurodegenerative diseases involve high levels of oxidative stress, and thus ascorbate has been posited and proposed to have potential therapeutic roles against stroke, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and Huntington's disease. So, thinking about vitamin C as an antioxidant, well, if it has a role in neutralizing or mitigating or um, kind of offsetting any oxidative stress, well, then it has a potential role in, these really pretty awful disease states. So next up is, and last but not least, is that there's a study of um, vitamin C and how it's impacted uh, potential cancer therapies. And this was a paper that I picked because it was kind of interesting. The title is Integrative Oncology for High-Grade Glioma, a case report on the combined effects of oncothermia and complementary therapies. Now, I bring this up because although there is some reason to believe that vitamin C might play a role in um, kind of alleviating disease states, or maybe um, helping with things like Huntington's disease, it's also kind of there's a lot that needs to be done to study vitamin C well and to understand its role. And vitamin C might be something that's very valuable, but it's also something that maybe the extent to which it can benefit someone, maybe that's already been investigated thoroughly and there's really not anything there. I bring this particular paper up because this right here, this word, oncothermia. Well, oncothermia is basically like you can kind of think about it almost like a cold, maybe not exactly, but like a cold plunge. You're heating up something, or you're cooling something down to treat a cancer. And this was combined with giving lots of vitamin C. And ultimately, what this paper concluded was, hey, look, maybe these combined therapies were successful in reducing the size of the tumor um, by 12%. And there's a couple of other therapies that are mentioned in this paper. And I'm not wanting you to doubt the value of vitamin C, but I just want you to think about it as like, yeah, it could potentially be good. Is it, is it kind of like, is it a cure-all? I don't think so. Is it potentially beneficial for people to take vitamin C? By and large, I think there's evidence that says that it is. Is it essential for preventing scurvy? There's pretty much no doubt because when we looked back at, you know, what what's the role of vitamin C in a process? Well, it's making that hydroxyproline. Now, I want you to know the potential roles that vitamin C has. I do want you to know that hydroxyproline, that's an important thing. I want you to know that with vitamin C, you can take proline to make hydroxyproline. Okay, so that's one thing. And then what's the significance of that hydroxyproline? That hydroxyproline is pretty essential for basically stabilizing a collagen structure. Okay, well, that's kind of where I wanted to wrap all this up. In our next class, which I'm going to be doing live, but I'm going to record as well and post that on our Canvas page as always. We're going to be talking about vitamin D. Now, one distinction between vitamin C and vitamin D is that, well, they're kind of classified differently. Vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin, whereas vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. Which is why if you were to get a vitamin D pill like that I've got here, they always come in these little gels. And that's because, well, that's a bunch of lipids, that's a bunch of fats in there. And vitamin D is one of them. Vitamin C, on the other hand, if you get a vitamin C pill or capsule or something like that, and you add that to water, it goes into solution very well. Okay, well, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I will see you on Tuesday. Thanks.